Friendly fire will not be tolerated. So how do we keep it from happening in real life? You might think this is just super obvious. Justin, of course, just don't shoot the guys wearing our own uniforms, but it's actually a lot harder than you probably think. Everyone's gear looks the same these days. You can't tell who's who at a distance under thermals, and the Navy can't even avoid shooting down their own jets when literally no other jets are in the area. Friendly fire isn't, as the saying goes, and unlike in video games, it is always on. And team killing is much more frowned upon in real life than it is in Black Ops. It is generally ill-advisable to do the enemy's job for them by schwacking your own dudes, so the military actually puts a lot of effort into preventing that from happening. From simple signals to attaching special equipment to your tank, to just saying fuck it and putting colored tape on your arm, making sure you don't off your own dudes, whether they be in a plane, tank, or on the ground, can be a lot more complicated than you might realize, so we have a lot to cover. My plan is to talk about the simplest ways that militaries prevent fratricide, as friendly fire is called formally, and then move on to the more complex and sexier ways that it happens. Okay, so the simplest way to prevent your guys from shooting each other on accident is to simply tell them not to do that. Who'da thunk it? But you do that by teaching them the things that they are supposed to shoot. Simplest way to do that is to just show them what they're supposed to shoot at. Things like publishing short films that go over enemy gear and equipment, or dressing up your own guys in bad guy uniforms used to be pretty popular. These days, we have that in some degree with dedicated opposing force units being armed with equipment you would find used by some of the more expected enemy armies. One of the biggest ways that the military does this currently is with VID, or Vehicle Identification, which is exactly what it sounds like. And if you've ever been attached to any kind of mechanized military unit, that might send a small shiver down your spine, because it means hours and hours spent memorizing every detail of essentially every single vehicle used by us, our allies, and our enemies from every angle imaginable. Now, your first instinct might be to pop up and say, oh, but this looks so simple. Obviously, this is good guy tank and this is bad guy tank, but half the time good guy tank and bad guy tank look like this. So doing things like counting road wheels, memorizing where the hot spots are from the exhaust, where there are little gaps underneath the track, and specific shapes that are unique to the vehicle. Those are the kinds of things that get hammered into crews again and again and again and again, all up to the point of wailing and gnashing of teeth. Situational awareness while inside of an armored vehicle is generally garbage, and while thermals make it very easy to spot targets in general, they remove a lot of the detail that would otherwise make it more obvious if it's a good guy or bad guy. But Justin, you say, trying to get in a snide little quip, what about militaries that use basically the same vehicles but still fight each other? How does one determine what a good guy in a BMP and a bad guy in a BMP look like? Answer: combat identification panels. These metal things that look like window shades or clapboard designs for you architectural types are actually for disrupting thermal signatures in a way that makes it more obvious what you're actually looking at. These are a relatively new invention compared to, I guess, the grand scheme of things, really only being developed after the Gulf War, which had a number of notable friendly fire incidents and was one of the largest deployment of vehicles with thermal imagers in history up to that point. These can be used not only to determine who is a friendly tank and who is not, but who specifically is in that tank. Let me explain. This might come as a surprise, but if you stick two Abrams next to each other, it is not easy to determine which one is commanded by Frank and which one is commanded by Jimmy. He prefers to go by James, but you still call him Jimmy because you know it pisses him off. Anyway, typically each unit will have their own way of how they set things up specifically. So location on the hull, number of them, and shape that the panels are arranged will tell you specifically where that vehicle falls in the order of everything. And as things like thermal imagers on vehicles became more common, so too did night vision for the infantry types. Now, determining if something is a friendly tank versus an enemy tank under thermals might be difficult sometimes, but it can be a cakewalk compared to doing that with just guys standing around in the open. Infrared signatures. Unlike the human eye, night vision devices are able to pick up IR signatures. You know that one AC-130 mission where the guy keeps telling you not to fire on the flashing strobes? Yeah, well, that's because of these things. IR strobes, crazy. During the global war on terror, this kind of technique in identifying friendlies at night became incredibly popular because it made it super easy for all of us with night vision, but literally invisible to anyone who didn't. That's why when the army started rolling out its ill-fated ACU uniforms, they came standard with these little tabs that when flipped up would reflect IR light. And this is when units began getting issued those cool guy IR flags that would do the same thing. But Justin, you cry, what if we have to fight someone that also has night vision? Which would make active strobes a giant sign that says shoot here directly at my head. Great question, and it brings us to the second way that we prevent friendly fire: codes and number combinations. Depending on the day or before setting out on some kind of mission, units will typically dictate what their number combination is, and that's going to be a number less than 10 that serves as a very simple passcode. Each set of standard night vision issued by the military will have an IR flashlight. If you spot someone at night and want to know if they're friendly or foe, you'll flash them with a number that is less than the number that your unit is using as the passcode, and they have to respond with whatever number will add up to the actual answer. So for example, if the number combination for the day is 7, one person could flash 3 times, and the other person would have to flash 4 times, so that both know going sicko mode on the trigger would be a big mistake. Generally, it is considered best practice to pick an odd number, because if you pick an even number and you just do half of it, the other person could just simply mimic you and get the right answer. So for example, if the passcode for the day is 6, and I flash you 3 times, and you just mimic me because you don't know what's going on, and you do 3 as well, I think you're a friendly, and you get to come shoot me. But Justin, yeah, I know what you're going to ask. What if it's during the daytime? How do we do this kind of thing? Well, the nice thing is that our options just increased from overnight. So we can still use the number combination verbally, but we can also use things like challenge and passwords or other kinds of visual signals. You know that one scene in Band of Brothers with the thunder flash thing? Yeah, it's that. Of course, this all looks very differently when bullets are actively flying, and even if things are very obvious as to who is who in a given fight, it is important that we try to make sure that we're not accidentally shooting people, even if we do know that they are friendly. And that's why we use things called direct fire control measures. These are, in short, how soldiers know where to shoot and when. If we're in, say, a picture-perfect assault and things are going well for some reason, we still need to be able to move one group of soldiers across the objective that is actively being engaged by a second supporting element. A machine gunner hyped on adrenaline and Zen pouches will literally shoot at anything that moves, so it's best not to rely on his ability to determine who the bad guys are and who they aren't. So, using things like flares, radio communications, and pre-planned points called target reference points, 2 groups can clearly communicate when to shift where they're shooting and when, and not test to see if someone actually has their side plates in or not. Now that's all fine and dandy, but it still does not address the issue that everyone these days is running around in some form of multicam, and we all have these scary tactical looking assault rifles. And like many of mankind's problems, the answer can be solved with just some duct tape. The most common way we've seen recently has been the yellow and blue and a few other colors used by Ukraine on easily visible parts of the body, while Russia uses red in a similar way. This kind of thing has extended to marking both sides' vehicles, with Z being the most well-known battle marking to denote it's a Russian asset. However, each side has a number of shapes and symbols that delineate who is who and what they're doing. Things generally get kind of sketchy when you start doing stuff like throwing duct tape onto your arm to make sure you don't get shot at by your own guys. And if you're a North Korean that was unlucky enough to find himself fighting against Ukraine, well, you generally can't be bothered to care anyway. But what's to stop an enemy force from trying to trick the other side by wearing their uniform or wearing their color of duct tape per se? It's a great question, but it is a very bad idea for 2 very good reasons. Reason number 1, you are very likely to get shot by your own guys. This should be an obvious one, considering it would take impossibly perfect levels of communication and coordination with every single person on your side of the battlefield in order for you to be disguised, but you would be better off trying to use that energy and actually killing the guys you're fighting rather than trying to prevent some disguised people from getting friendly fired. Secondly, it's a war crime. Disguising yourself as the army you are fighting for the purpose of deception is called perfidy, and it's illegal under the Geneva Conventions. So while there might be some level of tactical payoff if you manage to get away with it, if you don't, you lose all rights as a prisoner of war and will probably spend the rest of your days in a damp basement with a flickering light bulb or lying in a hole while someone sprinkles lime powder over your body. These are pretty boring, low-tech answers, but how do we prevent friendly fire in a more high-tech, sexy way? Well, one of the most common, if not the most common ways that friendly fire happens is if you didn't know friendly forces were in a particular area. And so when you saw dudes with rifles and camouflage uniforms and you didn't know that there were friendlies in that area, you would probably be right to assume that they were bad guys and fire upon them. Luckily, the military has essentially the Find My function on a majority of its people and things, called digital battlefield management. If you're in some kind of vehicle, odds are you're going to be using something like the JBCP, or Joint Battle Command Platform. Think of this as a mini-map for your vehicle, telling you where you are, where your buddies are, and where you think the enemies might be. It's not a perfect system, and anyone who has used it would know to do a bit of critical thinking before sending rounds down range at a target, but it's better than just looking at a white blob on thermals and flipping a coin. On the dismounted side is the Android Tactical Assault Kit, and it basically serves the same purpose. Plus, it's a good way to check if your Uber Eats order is close or not. These kinds of technologies technologies are trying to be implemented into things like the IVAS system, but until people figure out how to make those things not suck balls, we'll be sticking with phone screens for now. But say you're one of those military people that flies around in planes and engages things before you can even see them. We're going to talk about that, but unfortunately it's about to get really technical in the video, so I will be adjusting the format accordingly. If you are a NATO type of plane driver person, you're more than likely going to use what's called a Mode 5 IFF system. This is a NATO standard identification, friendly or foe, interrogation, and response that offers improved cryptographic security against jamming and spoofing efforts compared to previous generations. How it works is an interrogator, typically found on fighters, surveillance aircraft, or a ground station, will send out an encrypted signal over an L-band frequency, which is commonly used in military aviation because they are pretty good at punching through things like clouds, rain, dust, stuff like that. The signal is received by a transponder, which decrypts the signal based on a set of keys that both aircraft will operate from. If the challenge is valid, the transponder will be able to generate a synchronized response based on the algorithm of the signal itself. If there is no transponder that is synced up to the IFF system in the interrogator to send back a signal, then with a combination of any detected radar signatures, it will give a pilot an idea if it's a hostile aircraft or at the very least unidentified. All of this happens within just a handful of milliseconds in order to give pilots the most possible time in order to react for an enemy aircraft they've just spotted. Alright, we got through that. I'm really proud of everyone. I hope you're still with me. If you've ever seen a video or played a video game with a Stinger missile, you might have wondered what this little basket looking thing on the side of it is. And no, it's not for holding produce. It's actually an IFF antenna that ensures we don't shoot down our own guys. If you thought it was hard enough to figure out who was friend or foe with the latest in advanced avionics, I promise it's a lot harder when all you have are your two eyeballs and your buddy who keeps telling you to send it every time you see a civilian airliner. Now, of course, everything I've said in this video is how things are supposed to go, at least on paper. But if you want to know how stuff usually goes, just replay that one Modern Warfare 2 mission where the messenger forgets the passcode, yells at the other soldiers to please not shoot him, and then gets chewed out by Sergeant Foley for not remembering the response. It's the most realistic thing they've ever made in a video game. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.